Well, it's about that time. Enough of you tweeted questions to me for this hashtag NFL Draft Q&A that I've got enough content and questions to be able to give you an NFL Draft Q&A. If you have any NFL Draft related questions that you want answered, make sure you tweet them to me on Twitter at pfspot_Schlegel is the Twitter handle. So let's get started with this Q&A. At Sackmaster101 wants to know, if the Rams don't take a quarterback in the first round, should they trade down and take Dorial Green-Beckham? Dorial Green-Beckham would make a lot of sense. Dorial Green-Beckham for the St. Louis Rams would be worth the gamble, would be worth the roll of the dice. Might be worth the gamble and the roll of the dice at pick number 10, but he most especially would be if they were able to trade down a little bit. Look, I understand that the Rams need a quarterback, and that Sam Bradford is not that guy. I also understand that more likely not, unless they're going to make a big, that is potentially cost prohibitive move up the draft board into the top 2 or maybe even into the top 4 to get either Winston or Mariota, whoever would be there. They're going to have to get help in other places, and one place they desperately need help is a big-time number 1 wide receiver. Dorial Green-Beckham, while raw and while having some character issues, has the potential to be just that. From a physical standpoint, he's the best physical prospect at the wide receiver position in the 2015 NFL Draft, and he would seem to fit what Jeff Fisher would be okay with and what Les Snead and that organization would be okay with. A guy with tremendous talent, tremendous upside, somewhat raw, and with some baggage. They don't mind the baggage so much. So I think the Rams would make really good sense for Dorial Green-Beckham. I think it's a good match for both parties, frankly. Chopping it up 68. Do you think that the Ryan Pace and John Fox regime will do a good job for the Bears in this upcoming draft? I'll say this is that it would be really hard for them to screw up because when you look at their needs, even though they're 5-11 last year, they have needs everywhere. And the number 1 need is quarterback, which they probably won't be able to address in round 1. After that, so many of their other needs they should be able to address at different points throughout the draft. And when you look at where they're at with pick number 7 and what type of players could be there at number 7 in round 1, unless they take Gregory, of course, and that screws the whole pooch, with their 7th pick in round number 2, and then again in round number 3, and even round number 4, they're going to be different guys at different positions, inside linebacker, outside linebacker, potentially a slot receiver. It's going to be really hard for this regime to screw up this draft. I will be cautiously optimistic that they will get it right. I'll be cautiously optimistic that they will find 1 absolute stud and 2 to 3 other long-term contributors out of this draft. It's a good draft, and as a result, they can't screw the pooch. I wouldn't think it'd be that bad to where they weren't able to get a series of contributors. They were only able to get one, like mediocre one. I have a little more faith in them in that at this point, especially with their perspective of best player available. Now, Phil Emery in a lot of ways had best player available, but he also would have a bit of a kind of philosophical board setup each draft, and I never understood the philosophical board setup. Phil Emery didn't understand the draft game, and he didn't understand where players were ranked, and that was one of his biggest things. Was it wasn't just what he would address, it would be who he addressed it with and where he would address it at. I mean, just had no clue, just no clue whatsoever. Let's see here. Fulia Georgian 1. To an NFL fan who loves the game but does not have a favorite team, how would you make a case for the Chicago Bears? Stay away. Stay very, very far away. Honestly, I wouldn't make a case for the Chicago Bears at this point in time. The day that they get rid of Cutler and they find a young franchise quarterback to build around, that would be a time to consider hopping on the bandwagon. Until this point in time, you don't want none of this. You don't need this in your life. You don't want it in your life. I promise you. You don't want it, period. Sometimes I wonder if I want it in my life. But it's there. It's like ingrained in every fiber of my fucking being. Let's see here. H-Time_Texas. Your thoughts on Dante Fowler Jr.? I've been a huge fan of his and feel he's the number 1 pass rusher this year. One thing that concerns me about all of the widely viewed top edge rushing prospects is they really seem to lack power moves. and power to their game. The guy that seems to have the most of it to me and uses his hands the best is Dante Fowler Jr. I like him a lot. I really do as a prospect. Top 10 talent in this draft in my mind. I don't know quite if he's a top 5 guy. I need to go back and reevaluate him and the other edge rushers when I do that here on this channel, and then I'll let you know exactly where I rank him. But he's one of my favorite edge rushers in this draft, maybe right after Shane Ray, maybe even above Shane Ray. But, you know, I wouldn't be mad if the Bears took him at 7. How about that? So let's see. And then he also asked, should my Texans draft offense at round number 1? I feel they should, especially if Bill is going to give Mallet a chance. They should have drafted offense last year. Or if they were going to draft defense, actually draft the fucking guy that fit the damn defensive scheme you were running in the 3-4 in Khalil Mack, not Jadeveon Clowney. That's an organization that didn't know what the fuck they were doing. It was a GM and a head coach that didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They didn't. And really, when you look at that 14 draft from the Texans, it wasn't very good. Didn't produce a whole lot. But yeah, you've brought in an offensive-minded head coach. It would be really silly to me for the second straight year to just devote a first-round pick to the defensive side of the ball. You know, if the board breaks a certain way where there's just a player that is just too good for them to pass up at 16, that's a different story. But in general, I do feel they should be looking on the offensive end of the ball. Problem is they're not going to be able to get a quarterback at 16. It probably is a little too early to be looking at Gurley or Gordon. And then in terms of wide receiver, yeah, they could go wide receiver, but at that point in time, the top 4 guys could all be off of the board, and that would be White, Parker, Green-Beckham, Cooper, and that might be a little too steep of a price to pay to draft somebody like a Jalen Strong or Devin Smith, what have you. Or even if some people have had Brett Perriman, son Breshad Perriman from UCF, rising up boards. He's all right, but he ain't a first-round talent the way I see it at this point. So it's just a matter of the value of the pick or the value of the player. I might match up for the Texans more at 16 on the defensive side of the ball, frankly. So it would depend on what they would do. Alex Shirley, 10. Should the Titans go for Duke Johnson in the second round of the draft? Well, they most certainly shouldn't have gone for Bishop Sankey last year. I mean, you just think about that. They could have had Jeremy Hill or even Carlos Hyde. And instead they took Bishop Sankey. Should they consider him? Goddamn right they should consider him. They really, really should. Dan V. If the Bears decide to go safety in the first round, who would be the best option at number 7? Well, they better not go safety at number 7. Because the only safety that looks like he's a lock to be a first-round pick is Landon Collins, and he's a guy that's probably going to go in the 20s because he's in the box strong safety. To me, for the Bears, I'd much rather have Shaq Thompson playing safety. That would be the guy that I would want, but based off the way things look like they'll break down now, and especially since, thank God, Shaq Thompson ran so terribly at the combine, running in the 4.7s, so he should have run in the 4.4s. You know, he might be there in the early portion of round number 2. My dick gets hard just thinking about it. You know, right around the time the Bears pick it round 2. So no, they shouldn't go safety. Landon Collins would be a big reach at number 7. Don't draft a strong safety at number 7 when you have so many other needs. And, you know, for all the talk about the Bears and their needs at the safety position, and believe me, I've talked about that at great length over the years. Just check out the history on this channel. I don't think that's the number 1 need on that defense. If we're going from a need standpoint, it's the linebacking core, especially now that they've went to a 3-4 defense, which requires an extra starting linebacker on the field for 60 to 70% of the time. I mean, who the fuck is in that linebacking core? Briggs is washed up. Williams is done. What do you got? Shane McClellan, Jonathan Bostic. Oh, that's a good one. You know, Christian Jones might be one starter on the inside. What the fuck do you have? You ain't got shit, period. So I know safety's a bad need area. It's number 2 on this defense. Maybe number 3 after a nose tackle, but number 1 by far has to be the linebacking core in all areas. Let's see here. IMPT_3 is James Conner from Pitt next year's top running back prospect if he declares. There could be some argument made to that. A lot of people are going to look at Ezekiel Elliott from Ohio State, especially with the performance he had later on in the season. So those would be two of the top guys on my mind at this point in time. Let's see here. One shot you die 55. Which running back or wide receiver would you think would fit best for the Patriots in any round or in round number one? In round number one, it's going to be Gurley if he was there. It would have to be Gurley. In terms of wide receiver, a guy that would fit them a little bit later on would be a guy like Justin Hardy. He would make some sense for them in terms of another guy in the slot. In terms of a guy on the outside, maybe the aforementioned Breshad Perriman would be a guy. Again, I don't view him as a first-round prospect, but some teams probably are going to. So those would be a couple of guys that I could think of right there. In terms of running backs later on in the draft, maybe a guy like David Johnson out of Northern Iowa would make a lot of sense. But again, I think there's a chance he goes in round number 2, which is where he probably should go. Maybe a guy like Malcolm Brown from Texas is a former 5-star recruit. Maybe with his power running ability between the tackles, the Patriots take a gamble and it pays off for him. J. McClurg 9243, is Kevin Johnson the best corner in this draft? In my opinion, he is. I think he might be top 5. I personally don't have him as my top guy. However, I'm probably still another 3 to 4 weeks away from fully and completely top to bottom up, grading the quarterback prospects in this draft. I'm starting to upload wide receiver prospect scouting reports, which means now I'm working on running backs. Once you start seeing the running back videos, that means I'm working on the offensive lineman. And granted, these are players and prospects and positions I've watched over the past year, in some players' cases 2-3 years, but I still go back and I try to go through it with a fine-tooth comb and try to watch things again and be as thorough as I possibly could be with the limited time that I have to be able to do so. Let me see here. Baller B. Scott, Jay Ajayi reminds me of LaShawn McCoy and Jamal Charles. Do you see him as a running back who could live up to those lofty comparisons? I don't quite see him like that. I think maybe I see him a little bit more as somebody almost like a slightly smaller version of Arian Foster. I don't know if he could quite live up to those expectations. I see a lot to like about Ajayi, but there always seems to be something missing with him. I haven't been able to fully put my finger on it yet. Maybe I'll be able to figure it out by the time I put up his scouting report video in probably another week or so. But he's a guy, 2nd to 3rd round prospect the way I see it right now. I like him as a talent. I think he's a guy that could contribute. Maybe you would see if he was a little bit bigger, he almost has some of his game as like a Le'Veon Bell, perhaps. We could sit here and say they were lofty comparisons, but let's keep in mind, LaShawn McCoy was a former 2nd-round pick. Jamal Charles, former 3rd-round pick. A guy that I named, a guy like Arian Foster, formerly an undrafted player. Le'Veon Bell, 2nd-round pick. So it's not that Jay Ajayi would necessarily be in bad territory. So just let me know if you guys have any question. No, there's another one here. I'm sorry. NJCT, I apologize. I almost forgot your question. This is the last one here. What NFL team needs to have a great draft this year? There are a few teams more than others. I think the Tennessee Titans are the team that most desperately, badly needs to have a good draft because they have nothing in terms of an identity on either side of the ball. They need help all over the place. They need to find a quarterback, and then they need to find talent. So that would be one. The Raiders, they need help. They need to have a great draft. Another team we could talk about, besides my Chicago Bears, and they desperately need to have a great draft after so many terrible years of drafting, is the Washington Redskins. After all those picks that they lost due to the RG3 trade, you've still got RG3. You've got to nail it out of the park this year. Now you've got a full complement of picks. Now's the time to pounce and take advantage of that and really do your due diligence and deliver for your organization. So those would be some of the teams I look at that need to have a great draft this year. But again, thanks for all your questions. Make sure you tweet your next round of NFL draft questions to @PFSpot_Schlegel on Twitter using the hashtag, ladies and gentlemen, NFL Draft. All right, see you later.